In recent times, the number of people moving into the city has increased tremendously. With the increase comes the need to solve problems that residents will face from time to time. This has led to a somewhat thriving private sector that is evolving outside of government. Long before now, it was difficult to grasp the concept of an Abuja ecosystem, but thanks to organizations such as Startup Arewa, Ventures Platform Hub, comprising of Ventures Park, Ventures Platform Foundation, and Ventures Platform Fund, Network of Incubators and Innovators in Nigeria 9, Box Office, Layer 3, and a few more, we now have what you can refer to as an increasingly formidable Abuja ecosystem. Mimshach Obioha, Executive Director, Ventures Platform Foundation, joins us on the program.
Mimshach, glad to have you on the show today.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
So tell me, why do you think technology startups are important to any economy?
First of all, startups in general, whether technology or non-technology, are quite important. And particularly to Africa at this point, because as you know, there's a lot of unemployment, or rather the unemployment rate is really high. And what this means is that we need to create jobs. So there's a lot of young people. Africa has the youngest population in the world, which means that we have a lot of people below the age of 35. And what this also means is that we need to create a lot of jobs for these people. And that's what startups do. Entrepreneurs instinctively make businesses, and businesses create jobs.
From your experience, what are some of the challenges you think the startups face today?
So the first problem that founders have to face and jump over is, how do I make sure that the product I'm developing is something that users love? And that's why they need to go through ideation in validating the problem and then validating the solution. And once you cross that hurdle, then now you have a product, it's in the market, you've built an MVP or a prototype, and people are beginning to engage with it. The next big problem that you have to face is, how do I go beyond the prototype to a more elaborate product? How do I scale? How do I get it to the hands of more customers? And that's where fundraising comes in. And as we know, in this part of the world, patient capital is quite hard to find. We don't have a lot of angel investor networks. I think in Nigeria today, we have just about 3 angel networks. We have the Lagos Angel Network, we have the Abuja Angel Network, and I think we have the South Angel Network. But for a country of 200 million people, that's barely enough. And if you also check how many checks these networks have signed over the last 2-3 years, it's also not enough to push the ecosystem forward. So we need a lot more investment, and that's the next hurdle startups face. And in trying to pitch for investment, there's a lot of things you need to be sure that you can explain your product and your service to the person you're pitching to. The person has to be able to understand. And what we have in Nigeria is a lot of traditional investors. So they understand how to invest in a mom and pop shop. They know how to invest in bonds or build a building or buy land. But when you talk about technology, someone wants to give you 5 million naira for 80% equity. That's, of course, that's a no-brainer. But that's what they do with, like, if you want to open a barbing salon and you go and meet your uncle, you say, okay, I'll give you 2 million naira, I'll take 80%. And you'll be quite glad about it, right? But for technologies, investing is quite different.
Do you think that Nigerian startups are positioned to solve global problems?
Global problems is quite a long shot. I think it's very difficult for you to solve a problem that you're not facing, or a challenge that you're not a part of or you haven't felt. And that's why people basically like to solve problems that they face and then scale it to markets that have the similar problems. So for example, in Nigeria, there's a lot of problem around food security, there's a lot of problem around insecurity, there's a lot of problem around finance and access to finance. And that's why you basically see a lot of fintech startups coming out here, you see a lot of agri-tech startups coming up here, and a lot of edu-tech startups, because we're trying to solve local problems. Now the beauty of local problems is, if you solve a problem that other markets face, mostly emerging markets, then it's possible for it to now scale it to more emerging markets. So yes, we're basically beginning to see startups in Nigeria beginning to scale across the continent. Maybe not global yet, but quite a lot of them are beginning to move out of the shores of Nigeria.
Mimshach, what do you think we need to do to better prepare startups for funding? 2
main things. So the first is local ecosystem in terms of finance. We don't have enough angel investors, so a lot of startups have to get patient equity or patient capital that allows them fail, that allows them experiment. Many people don't want to play in that level. You want to play at a point where the startup has proven their value proposition, proven it in the market, and then now you want to give them some money. But at the beginning stages, we need more risk capital and more patient capital to help them experiment. The second thing is, unfortunately, our market is not quite big enough. And by market, I'm talking about the traditional sense of things, the people with the purchasing power to buy a lot of the kinds of products and services that people are producing here is not quite big enough. I remember when I was in Germany and I was pitching the Nigerian ecosystem to a German friend. And I told him about how great Nigerian startups are doing and how one startup is doing about 2 billion naira in revenue after 2 years of operation. Like 2 billion naira, 2 billion naira. How much is that in euros? And then like, that's about a couple of million euros. Like, oh, like that's too small. I'm like, that's small? Like, yeah, like my friend did a startup 2 months and they're already doing a couple of million of dollars. And in 2 years, they'll probably be doing so much bigger. And it dawned on me then that what we think is big here isn't quite big for the international market. And that's why even though we have lots of international investors coming, they're not coming as much. So for example, the whole of Nigeria raised about 700 and something million US dollars last year. And we say, wait, that's great. But that's smaller than what one company raises in Silicon Valley. So you can see like the difference is like really, really huge. We need to find companies that are solving problems for the bottom of the pyramid, because that's where the market is big.
Finally, Mimshach, in many parts of the world, the government serves as some sort of catalyst to ensure that the startup ecosystem thrives. What would you suggest that our government starts doing today?
A lot of stuff. I think one of the biggest problems is literacy, digital literacy. Digital literacy needs to take a front burner in any government policy today. I think from state governments, from local governments to state governments to federal government should take digital literacy very importantly. The reason is no job you want to do today that you would need some form of digital literacy, whether it's how to design or how to send an email to as complex as how to code. So digital literacy needs to be taken seriously. So one is, how do we get digital literacy into high schools? In fact, first of all, into elementary schools, then into high schools and into universities. So we're trying to graduates that are better prepared. That's the first thing. The second thing is, how do we incentivize entrepreneurship, especially in the innovation and the technology sector? How do we get more people to start up businesses? A lot of countries have different models around this. Some of them have incentives to start up founders. If you start a business, you have some grants that the federal government allows you to apply for on a very, very large scale. Or they incentivize banks to loan money to start up companies. These are some things that we need to think about around finance. And I think also, so incentives. Also, how do we incentivize angel investors? Because Nigeria has a ton of high net worth individuals, like people that were in government, people that have oil wells, people that are doing large businesses like the Dangotes. But are you wondered why Dangote is not investing in technology? Or why Jimovia is not investing in technology? Or why Adenuga is not, beyond, of course, the telco infrastructure that he has? It's basically, one, I think they might not know, but next, there's no incentive to do that. So if the government says, oh great, so for example, something that happens in Britain is if you invest in a startup, you get, and the startup fails in the first 2 years, the government pays you back in tax break. What that simply means is you have no risk. For 2 years, you have no risk. So more people are inspired and motivated to put money into startups. So how do we incentivize more angel investors? Then if we go beyond that, then how does the government itself put money down for finance? So one of the things we'll be pitching to the government is how do you do match funding for startups? So for example, tell a startup that, look, if you're in this sector, and this sector, and this sector, you're doing this and this. If you want to raise, say, your seed round, and you want to raise $1 million, if you can go raise $500,000, we will give you $500,000. What that means is when I'm going to pitch to an investor, no, there's nothing as sweet as telling an investor, I'm raising $1 million, but I have $500,000 on lockdown. What that means is, like, I feel you're making progress, I need to get into the pot quickly. But when you go and say, I'm raising $1 million, how much you got? None. You're going to be the first investor, like, oh no, come back when you have somebody, right? So the government putting down a fund that actually puts money, and we're saying don't make it a grant, make it match funding. Like, if you find half, we will give you half. Or if you find 80, if you find 70, we give you 30%. But let's have match funding. Then let's go into the ease of doing business. How do we make it easier for people to register their businesses? How do we make it easier for people to pay taxes? Like, it should be easy. Like, a startup should register their business and they ask you a couple of questions and say, okay, great, here, you have a pioneer status for the next 3 years, tax-free. Exactly, let's make it easy for people to do. Then let's get public procurement. The government today is still the highest spender, sadly. However, startups are excluded, which means that as a startup founder, I can't build a website for a ministry. So we want startups to be able to bid for such things. Small money, 1 million, 2 million naira, do a website, do a database, do a learning management system. But those small things can actually be a lot of encouragement for startups. And so some of these things are just like basic ideas, from education to public procurement to taxes to incentives, and then to a fund that basically helps startups. So that's some things we can do.
Mimshach, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you on the show today. Thank you for being on the show.
My pleasure.
And keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
Wish you all the best.
Thank you.
My guest has been Mimshach Obioha, Executive Director, Ventures Platform Foundation here in Abuja. As you've heard from him, we need to do a lot to ensure that our startups survive and that our startups are able to scale. And it starts with ensuring that the foundation is right. The government also has a major role to play because our startups can actually solve some of the problems that we face today. That has been our show for today. Please follow us on social media, and don't forget you can watch these and previous editions of the show on the channel's TV YouTube account or via cfablog.ng. For Tech Trends, I'm Chukwemeka Agbata.